You've got it. You better stop it. Ooh. You've got it. You've got it.
We are thrilled to have Jason Sachs from the Positive Coaching Alliance today on the podcast. Jason has been with PCA since 2006 and currently serves as president. He oversees national partnerships, fundraising, and regional operations, working with professional sports leagues and youth organizations. Previously, he held roles such as Chief Development Officer and Executive Director of PCA's Chicago chapter. Jason began his career in sports television production and worked with the New York Knicks Basketball Operations. He holds degrees from Syracuse University and NYU. Outside PCA, Jason teaches at Northwestern and coaches youth sports. He lives in suburban Chicago with his wife and twins.
Where do we begin, Juliet?
Yeah, I mean, this conversation, I think, is one of my favorite.
Because it's the most important?
Yeah.
Or because you're living it?
Well, I mean, I think for all those reasons, I think we are such fans of youth sports.
And coaches.
We are fans of coaches. We are pro-coach. We often think coaches are underappreciated and underpaid. And the job of coach is so important and so impactful in kids' lives. And at the same time, we think there are a lot of serious challenges in youth sports.
That's really nice of you to say, challenges. I think there's a lot of opportunity to level set here.
Yeah.
We need to be better at communicating as coaches to athletes, as athletes to coaches, and parents to athletes and parents to coaches. There's sort of three stakeholders here. The PCA really tries to do an amazing job of saying, hey, I think we actually can have a better experience. And their mission to bring sports and all the potential upside to communities where it's not pay to play, where there is an opportunity, it really transforms society, transforms communities.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think they really are trying to provide, on the ground education and resources to parents and coaches and students to navigate this, often crazy experience that is youth sports. And I think just this, even just the step of like going to their website with a little bit of intention, if you fall into any of those groups, to just say, hey, there might be a better way, I think would go a long way. A different way, a better way.
You can have a better experience as a family.
Yeah.
And unlike any other podcast, if you have a youth athlete in your family, you have now a piece of homework. You're going to need to go do the 100-point drill, which is on their website.
Yeah, I mean, I love that this is just like something everybody can do. And I mean, even better if you're sort of early in your kid's youth sports journey so that you and your kid can really get aligned about like what it is you're hoping to get out of this. I sort of wish we had it when our kids were younger, but I still think we could do it today. And, I'm obviously a little biased since I sit on the National Leadership Council of Positive Coaching Alliance, but I think they are doing really amazing, impactful work in this area of youth sports, which I think has become so extra important in a universe where kids are on tech a lot and not getting outside as much and not doing as much free play. You and I have talked about how like critically important youth sports have become. And so I love that they are trying to create more access for kids who don't have access to sports. They're trying to create resources for coaches to make their experience more positive and for kids to be more positive and just to keep more kids in sports for longer.
And if you look at where he points out, if you look where people are gathering, it's the sports fields.
Yeah.
That's where we're potentially
community hub.
It's the community hub. So let's do a little bit better at that. Let's shout at more kids. Let's have more toxic interaction with refs. Right. Let's be upset in the car. No one wants those things. That's why you need to listen to this podcast.
Yeah. And before we get to it, if you enjoy our show, please be sure to hit like and subscribe. And if you listen through Apple or Spotify, please leave a review to help others find our show. And without further ado, please enjoy our conversation with Jason Sachs. Jason, welcome to the Ready State podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So I usually like to try to do something chronological, which drives Kelly insane. But I would just like to kick it off today and ask, what are the biggest challenges you're seeing in youth sports today?
How long is the podcast? No, I'm just kidding. So, I mean, I think the thing is there are a lot of, I think youth sports is such an unbelievable opportunity. And that's why I think people get so passionate about it, but we want to make sure that they're doing youth sports the right way. So I think a couple things that first come to mind on challenges is there is this, I think, rush to almost like professionalize or rush to move kids along really quickly in their youth sports pathway, which I think we need to slow that down a little bit. But it's really hard because the environment around them and around not only kids but parents and decision making on where parents want to have their kids play youth sports. I think there's a lot of pressure there. I think another challenge in youth sports is, we'll stick with the parents theme, is just parents, whether it's parents on the sidelines at games or parents feeling like their kids need to be playing sports year round, or, multiple sports each season, or feeling like if their kid isn't, playing on a travel team in fourth grade, that they're not going to make the varsity team at high school. And then what's the point of all this? And then they're not going to get their scholarship. So I think it's the education of parents. I think parents are a great opportunity to be able to advocate for a positive youth sports experience for everyone. And I just think as we start to look at what's happening in sports in general, everything from, NIL at the college level, and does that start to trickle down more? If you look at like all the challenges that are facing our kids on a day-to-day basis around mental health, and how do sports play both a positive and negative impact on kids' mental health, I think is important. So there's a lot of different things where, there are a lot of challenges, but I think what's so great is that youth sports is such a great opportunity. And I think one of the biggest challenges is that not everyone has access to it. So, how do we make sure that all kids have this opportunity? Because outside of schools, the youth sports platform in our country is the largest place where kids gather. And if it's done right, it actually can be used for positive youth development, mental and physical well-being. But we have to do it right. And right now, there's a lot of people that aren't necessarily doing it right.
Let me ask you this. I want to, that was a very Kelly question. Good job. Like you just got right in there. Just back up for a second.
Yeah.
Many parents and maybe people in the households have heard of the Positive Coaching Alliance. Can you talk about that organization and how you came to be sort of part of this incredible group? A lot of times coaches have to do some training. Sometimes there's training for parents and volunteers. Help us understand how the Positive Coaching Alliance came to be and why it's so exceptional.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that opportunity. So PCA, we're a national nonprofit organization. We've been around since 1998. We were founded out of Stanford University. Our founder, Jim Thompson, was actually working at the Graduate School of Business there. And in their public management, public policy side of things. But he was also a youth sports coach and a high school coach. And what he saw was he was working, living in the Bay Area, was coaching his son's, youth baseball and youth basketball team. He had written some books about coaching, but what he saw was, I'm in this area where there's a lot of smart people, a lot of successful people, and then they get to the youth sports fields and like everything they know goes out the window, right? And you have kids that are
unconditional positive regard, except for 12-year-olds.
Right, exactly. And his background prior to that was, he had dropped out of college initially and went and worked at a school where for kids with really, severe emotional behavioral issues. And the theme of that school was relentless positivity. So he had that background, and then he started seeing some of these, issues that were happening in youth sports. And with some of his coaching background, he thought, maybe there's something here. Youth sports is such this great opportunity. And so he started PCA back in 1998. We basically partner with schools and youth sports organizations across the country at the grassroots level. And it's all around how do we make sure that all kids have a positive youth sports experience. And the way we do that is by partnering and providing training, tools, and resources for organizational leaders, coaches, parents, the student athletes themselves, in communities where there might be barriers to actually access the youth sports experience. We're working with local stakeholders to try to provide more opportunities where kids can actually play. And if that means that we need to help recruit a coach, or if that means we have to help set up the actual program, that's what we want to do, because we know the power of sports. So with that, we work at that grassroots level. We also work at the national level with professional sports leagues, national governing bodies, corporate partners, where they see the value in, I think for professional sports leagues, kids that are playing youth sports are the future fans. So it's a business decision for them to invest in making sure that kids stay involved in sports longer. And we talk to professional teams about this all the time. It's like, great, you're setting up this youth basketball league and the kids are wearing your jersey with your local NBA team on it. But guess what? If they have a crappy coach and they have a bad experience, they're not going to want to play the sport anymore. And then they're going to associate your logo with a bad experience. So how do we make sure that we are actually equipping all those involved in the youth sports experience with the tools and resources that they need to make it a positive one? And guess what? We're not anti-competition. We're not everybody gets a trophy. We are, how do you strive to compete at the highest level, but doing it in the right way? And that's the key thing. A lot of people will say, sports develop character, or, right. Like that's the saying. But if you need to be deliberate with it, sports on its own is not going to do all those things. Sports on its own is actually an environment for a lot of different abuse and negativity. And so we need to be deliberate with how do we do sports right, and how do we invest in make sure that we're doing it right.
Here, here.
Yeah. Amen to that.
I have one follow-up question.
Yeah.
How's it going?
Wait,
Are we winning? Are we winning this battle?
Let me try to frame that a little more. You said something earlier that I really love, and I think Kelly and I struggle a bit with. It seems like the only conversation often around youth sports is about over specialization, and in our view, it's the challenges with youth sports go well beyond specialization. While we do think that that's a problem.
Yeah.
So I think this is sort of a two-part question. And I want to say that I actually love that you use the word professionalization, because I almost prefer that to specialization. And I think we've come to really think that this, we've maybe sent the wrong message on this don't over specialize, because what I think a lot of parents parents and kids have thought that the answer to that is go join a bunch of other sports.
Specialize in two sports.
Yeah, which then means you're specializing in two sports. You've added the cost and the travel time and the expense and the family chaos and the loss of sitting for dinner to a family that may already be max just doing one sport.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I just want to get your take on that, because I think that's been our feeling is like, hey, we need to have a different conversation just besides this. Okay, don't specialize. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, I love that you said that, because now as a parent, my wife and I, we have 9-year-old boy-girl twins. So they're early stages of youth sports. But now what I see a lot is, to your point, right? It's like, no, they're not playing one sport year round, but in the fall, they're actually playing 3 sports, right? In one season at that young age. And it's sort of like, hold on, no. Like, that's not what we meant by saying don't specialize, right? And so I think there's a lot of research that's come out about like how many sports you should be playing, in one season or one day. And they're like, don't play, you shouldn't be playing multiple sports in one day, like heavy competition in that. But I think that's how some parents think of like, hey, all right, we're not going to specialize in one sport, but I want to make sure that they're playing multiple sports in a season, because I think it comes down to that, getting left behind. And one of our parent workshops, we talk about like the stages of sports, and we talk about the romantic stage being that first stage of sports for kids. And that is being able to go out in the backyard, kick a ball against the wall, the house, just shoot baskets in the driveway, have a catch, like do that and always see the joy in that and be happy with that. What happened is we're cutting that phase short and we're getting to the technical stage really early and quickly, so that a kid starts playing soccer at like 3 or 4 years old in like a little kickers program or something like that. By the time they're 6 and 7, and I've seen it, they're saying, when can we start traveling to other cities so our 7-year-olds get better competition? And so when you think about that, it's like, well, like, why do they need better competition at 7, right? Like, what are we not investing in locally to be able to make sure that they have that good competition? So I veered off a little bit there, but I think what parents need to understand is that, are we putting too much strain on kids at an early age? And what, we all have heard, the specialization part, it leads to burnout, mental burnout, injuries, things like that. Piling a whole nother sport on top of one is not going to help you. It's just going to get to that burnout quicker.
So this all sounds great, you two, romanticists, idealists. How does a parent fight that, all of a sudden it's camps year round, the real pressure. There's secret societies of parents getting together with their kids. This is only just firsthand experience.
To like have private lessons.
Right.
Yeah.
That,
Yeah.
Coaches' favorites, this insidious club problem, which is incredible. We have incredible clubs in our neighborhood, but also simultaneously it's expensive.
Yeah.
It's right. Like there's so many issues here. How do, as a parent, where do I say no? How do I do that? Because if I really want to give my kid a break, and full disclosure, we have a daughter who's being recruited. She loves playing water polo. She's doing, and now we're in the deep specialization phase.
Right.
Time to
Which
specialize.
at a certain age, it's totally fine, right? Like,
Right.
when you get to a
She's
certain
lifting
point.
weights. Like we can talk more about that. But early on, help me create craft a narrative for a parent listening or a guardian listening where I get to say no, and I'm going to resist that. And it's not just me alone as an island, because I think it's really a problem.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm going to talk about a tool that we like to use and a resource, which I think everybody can benefit from it regardless of what age your child is. So we call it the 100-point exercise, and we give it to parents. And we basically ask them, the question is, what are your goals for your kids in youth sports? And then we ask them to divvy up 100 points. And there's, we have some pre-populated answers, have fun, learn the sport, meet friends, win, get a college scholarship. And we ask them to fill out.
Wait, that's one bucket, right? That's just like
just one. Yeah, exactly. That's what,
win,
exactly. Win, have fun, get to college. Yeah, exactly. That's one line.
100,
all right there. So we ask them to fill that out, and then we ask them to do two things after they've done that. So first, it starts to like put their minds in, and of course they're going to say like, "Oh, I only care about like the sportsmanship and having fun." Like there's that self image of how they want to see themselves with what they're doing. But then we'll say, okay, take that list, and where you're at the next competition or game, when you're cheering as a parent, are you cheering for the things that you want your kids to get out of sports? Are you only cheering for the results-oriented things that you're used to cheering for, right? Because it's like, what are we emphasizing and what are we rewarding? If we're only rewarding the wins, the losses, the goals scored, the points scored, but you said you didn't really care about that, right? In your 100-point exercise. The other thing we ask them to do is have your son or daughter fill that out. Where are they putting their points? And then are you on the same page? Are you aligned? And then I think that's a really important conversation between parent and child about what do we want about this youth sports experience? Because once you've set those expectations and you've created that alignment, then you can start to make better decisions on what you want to say yes to and what you want to say no to. And there might be times where everybody else is doing something and you say, you know what, that's not going to work for us right now. And I know how hard that is. And I'm not going to like say that I've been in all those situations and I have all the answers. And none of this necessarily is easy, but it's also, are we going to keep having the conversation about how crazy things are and then keep going along with it, right? So I think you also have to be comfortable in your own skin and sort of like, hey, this is just how we're going to do things. It's like we talk about organizational culture. This is the way we do things here. So it's either that's the way we do it or it's not the way we do it. If you haven't set those expectations and alignment between you and your family, that we don't want half of our vacations or all of our vacations centered around a youth sporting event, great. Then like, let's figure out how we actually do that.
So thank you for that. And we, of course, will, assuming there's a link to that 100-point exercise, we will put that in the show notes for anyone listening to this. And I think that is such an amazing exercise for people to do, just to bring some intention to like, what are we doing here? So that's awesome and so actionable. Thank you so much for that. Yeah. I think the second piece of it is how can we work, we as families and participants in youth sports or Positive Coaching Alliance, and I'm assuming you guys are already doing this, work with coaches to make sure that they're facilitating families who do want to have breaks
Yeah.
and
And
appreciating that, and have there not be a consequence, because I think
Right.
that's really where, I mean, if I could boil it down, parents' fear
absolutely.
is that, oh, well, if I skip this season and then show up for the other season, my kid is not going to get playtime. They're going to be benched. They're not going to make the team at all. And
It's a real power dynamic there.
Yeah, it's a real weird power
100%,
dynamic,
yeah.
and we've personally experienced it, so we know that it's pervasive. And I think it's if I could diagnose why parents do start to feel like, oh my God, I just got to keep going, it's that fear that they want their kid to continue to have opportunities even if they put in these breaks.
Yeah. It's that is one of the biggest, I think, challenges that parents face, right? And I think it's not easy for the coach either, right? If you're a coach, you're saying, hey, here are the expectations. If you're going to play on this team, here's what you need to do, right? Like, you got to show up to practice, you got to be able to play. Like, all those things are happening, and I get it, right? Like, you have to have those things in place. But I also think there are benefits for kids playing multiple sports, and how, not only from a physical standpoint, but just from a social standpoint, and how they interact and how they learn to be a better teammate. And I'm going to get to a story in a second here, but I think the most important thing is how are parents and athletes communicating with the coach before the season to try to work through those types of things. And I think it's a really great opportunity for kids, or, like, as they're getting older, to be able to have those types of conversations with your coaches. We always talk about sports is actually a really safe place to fail and make mistakes if it's done the right way. So it's great if we have, our child's in middle school or high school, and they want to have a hard conversation with a coach. Like, can the coach create, and I'm not saying not all coaches are like this right now, but we want them to be able to hopefully think about that. The center of all coaches, focus should be the well-being of the athlete, right? And if you have all these student athletes that feel good,
I think that's a big assumption.
Right. Exactly. Because I think a lot of coaches are thinking about it like, what's in it for me? And am I going to be the one that are reaping some of the benefits and the success of this team? Right. So I think that is a shift. And you jokingly said, like, how's it going, right, earlier? And I think from when I started at PCA 19 years ago to where we are today, there has been a shift, good and bad. More professionalization, commercialization of sport, not always the best thing. The focus on mental well-being, positive reinforcement, like the way we talk about it. When PCA was founded in 1998, we're big on mental models, and like, what is a mental model of like what you think a coach is? One of the most, well-known coaches at that time was Bobby Knight, right? Very successful coach, probably not the best way to go about treating your student athletes and things like that, right? We talked about jokingly.
All the chairs in the University of Indiana are now chained to the floor.
They're not moving
Actually
anywhere.
True. You can't throw a chair in the Hoosier Stadium.
But then we also talk about, like we were joking about the Ted Lasso thing earlier. Like, I don't think Ted Lasso can get made in 1998 because everybody would have been like, that's a fantasy land. But there's more, and people still think it's a fantasy land. But when you think about the comparison of him as a coach, and you look at some of, even you all had Sam Walker on the captain's class. He does a lot of, work with the Rams. You go back to when the Rams won the Super Bowl, and you listen to the players talk about what Sean McVay has created there, and the culture and the way you do things. We do a lot of work with, Steve Kerr's been a supporter of PCA. You look at his coaching philosophy, the way he does things, the way he gets the best out of his players. So I think it's giving coaches these mental models and examples of how it actually can get done is important. So that's basically thinking about, how do we put the well-being of the athlete, and not just about like these results, but how do we get better results from our athletes in a better way? The other thing is the benefits of playing different sports, and even with it, if it's within season. Another person on our national advisory board is Chris Collins, the head coach of Northwestern's men's basketball team. He's totally, built that program up from nothing. He played at Duke. His dad coached Michael Jordan, played for Coach K, has coached the Dream Team. He's got some, decent people in his network. But he said when he was growing up, he was the best basketball player on the team. His parents made him play other sports, so he played baseball because they wanted to get him a break from basketball. But he said one of the greatest lessons he got from playing baseball is that he was middle of the road player. he learned what it was like to be an okay player on a team and how he wanted to be treated by the better players. And then when he went back to basketball, where he was the best player, he knew what it was like on how he should treat his teammates, right? He knew what it was like to be the 7th or 8th player on the bench and what the best player, how it would be interacting. So when you think about like all these lessons and things that can be learned from sports, and not saying you going to your coach and being like, hey, listen, we're playing water polo and we're playing soccer, like we need to miss this game. They're going to learn all this stuff. Like the coach is like, I don't care about that. We have a practice. They need to be there. But I think opening the conversation and trying to work with the coach, and it's not always going to happen, but we have to start having these conversations. And I think we're really big on, not only we talked a little bit about expectations, but also open lines of communication and opening those lines of communication as early as possible so that it doesn't become there's a conflict and now this is the first time that we're having a conversation. So not always going to work, but yeah.
Yeah. And, I would just like to say our philosophy, and my guess is you agree when it comes to the specialization topic, is that there are a lot of ways to combat it with like non-formal sports. Our way of managing it is to make sure that our kids go backpacking and go on river trips and they ski and, we play catch in the front yard.
Olympic lifting club.
Yeah. And go to yoga or whatever. Like we've really tried to say, hey, we don't actually have the capacity as a family to do more than one club sport. And, our daughter does do 2 high school sports, but I mean, that's really like all that we can manage as a family and all she can manage as a student athlete. So our way of managing it is to say, hey, we don't need to sign up for some other competitive club sport or anything. That there's lots of the goal is just to have the kids move their bodies in different ways,
be active,
and be active, and learn how to interact with their environments in different ways. So I just think that's a different paradigm, and something we've been trying to talk about a lot.
I also think from like a recruit, like even when you get to the highest level of athletes, when they're getting recruited, I've had college coaches talk about like, I want to see the kids that have played multiple sports, because when they get on campus, they need to figure out where they fit. And there's going to be a lot of people on our team coming from different backgrounds. And if they can go from team to team and be able to fit in while they're in high school, and like, like I ran cross country in high school, but I also was a basketball player. Like those were 2 totally separate groups, right? But the ability to go from team to team and interact with different types of people, I think that's such an important life skill that people can take when they go into, the work world or whatever it might be. So
I love that.
We do believe that, and this is our own personal bias, that sports potentially creates one of the only frameworks to teach kids about stress and about sleep and nutrition and delayed gratification and communication and being on a team and failing, right? Someone wins and someone loses every game. Yeah. So there's that potential. We're also huge fans of coaches. And I sometimes in these conversations, I feel like coaches are just like, coaches. But I just, one of the things in the United States is that our whole youth sports program is based on volunteers out of the goodness of their heart. Like, I'm going to coach, right? And we hear our friends get sucked into this all the time. Yeah. And those coaches often default. So we have professional coaches and then just we'll call it the volunteer core. They default to their own experience. And maybe, as you say, the 1998 doesn't happen, but that's the last generation that drank out of a hose. Maybe that's the right, the change there.
It just was about volume. All training was like do as much as you can, as long as you can.
One of the things that I see is that, imagine being a coach and having to deal with 25 maniac families. It's 25 individual relationships, complexities, expectations. I mean, let's just play a game, Jay. True, false. Kelly likes to sit with other parents.
No.
So,
Kelly sits alone.
We really try to advocate, and on the side, I think kids are coming and we're expecting coaches to be, Albus Dumbledore, right? Like I'm going to teach lessons. I'm going to warm you up. I'm going to cool down. We're skill. We're going to work on communication. Like we got to get some work done. And I don't think necessarily parents have prepared their kids. Like we have an honest conversation about this thing we call Yes Coach, which is in the moment, doesn't matter what's going on, the answer is yes, coach. Unless you don't understand, then you can have, and then if there's a time to have a conversation, it's done on the other side. But that's something we set up our child for so that we can have better communication in the moment. Like you're not rolling your eyes, etc. Yes, coach. But how do we get volunteers, which is the first step, I think, for someone becoming a professional coach, into understanding, I'm going to call it soft skills, and I'm going to laugh at that. Because the skill is how do I communicate?
Yeah, I mean, teaching.
How do I create buy-in? How do I have kids belong? And those skills are always last on the laundry list of things I need to do. I need to worry about tactics and how I'm going to play. But you are I'm going to swear for maybe the first time ever, a shitty communicator. And it is offensive for me to watch coaches coach children without this set of skills.
Yeah. We joke, people call it like the soft skills, but they're the hardest to pick up. They're the hardest to, master. But you nailed it right there, right? Like, I think here's what happens. And I'm assuming maybe both of you have been a volunteer coach at some point with your own kids.
Yes.
Youth sports. Yes. Yeah. Right. I've done it. We love sports. We want to help out. I think there are a lot of people and a lot of leagues in all different communities, and there might be different reasons why they're not getting coaches, but just our kids are playing rec basketball, right? We had like 8 or 9 emails. We still need a coach. We still need a coach before we can pick these teams, right? And I think what happens is people see at certain ages, and I think this is one of the things we talk about at a national level with some other coach training providers, is like, what is this pathway for coaches, and at what age, what training do they need, right? Because if I'm coaching 5-year-olds in soccer, you know what I need to know? I need to know how to like smile, get down on their level, and give high fives, and keep them in order, right? I don't necessarily need to know all the tactical things of soccer, because at that point, we want them having fun so they keep coming back. As you get older, we obviously need to know some of the technical skills to teach them, but just as important to that is how do we communicate? How do we create this environment? I love that you said like this environment of belonging. How do kids show up and know that they are going to be in a space where they feel seen, feel heard, they feel like it's a space where they're valued? That's so important. But I think what happens is, I think many leagues are just, they don't have the resources, or they're scared to say, you need to do this training in order to coach, because they basically are just saying, we need a warm body, right, in order to have a practice. But we're also doing so much harm if that practice is really poorly run and the coach is a maniac and kids are like, you know what? I don't need to be here. Like, I'm 8 years old and there are better things for me to be doing than getting yelled at by some guy I don't know, right? And I think to your point, like, people coach, if they don't have training, they coach the way they were coached, 20 plus years ago, most likely, or what they see on TV, right? College. And I have seen 6-year-old park and rec basketball coaches acting as if they are an NBA coach, like calling a timeout after a 4-0 run in a 9-7 game. It's just like, and you're like, timeout, and it just is like, all right, we need to reset and reframe what a youth sports coach should be. So what we're trying to do when we work with organizations is, obviously we'd love for them to go through some sort of PCA training, because we teach a lot of those communication skills. How are you interacting with kids? What are you focusing on? How are you communicating with them? But also like a coach, almost like a coach job description. Hey, at this age group, this is what you need to be focusing on. And here are some resources for you to do that. Because I think also sometimes parents will say, well, I've never played this sport, or I've never coached, so I can't do it. So how can we lower that barrier of like this coach being this, oh my gosh, like you have to be some genius to coach. But no, here are the tools that you can get to make sure that you can be a good coach at this level. And I think oftentimes, you have to worry about field location, facilities, jerseys, like all these other things. And you're right that the soft skills often get put last. But if I were to say to both of you, who is the most impactful coach or mentor that you've had in your life, somebody just popped into your mind, and you think about why, it's not because all the games you won or records you broke or things like that. It's the way they made you feel. And that's what you remember, either positive or negative. But why are we not investing in those types of skill development for our coaches that are actually coaching? So that's what we want to talk to organizational leaders and coaches on. how can we make sure we're equipping you with what you need to make that a reality?
This episode of the Ready State podcast is brought to you by Element, and it continues to be hot element season.
It is hot
Our
element
favorite season.
One of the things that I'm seeing is when people are rolling out for exercising in the cold, they tend to have some coffee, and no one's like, let me chug a whole bunch of cold water. What I'm going to suggest is that you split that element in half, and you make a hot element as part of your pregame ritual to go outside and exercise in the cooler weather. You will get the salts, you'll hydrate, and it won't just be another cup of coffee, like black coffee that you're trying to warm yourself up. It is a game-changing experience. I recently was just on the sideline for like a whole day watching a college team play 4 scrimmages. Hot element all the way, baby.
Yeah, and I really have to try not to just keep drinking coffee until like 1 or 2 in the afternoon. Like my instinct is to want to keep drinking coffee.
You've been kept cutting your coffee off earlier and earlier.
Yeah, earlier and earlier. But I do love coffee, and it's like lovely to just sip on a warm beverage in the morning. And so I've really been trying to be conscious about saying, okay, I'm gonna have a couple cups of coffee, and then I'm gonna switch to hot element. And it turns out it sort of like meets that same like psychologic need. And what's a bonus is it tastes really good. It's filled with a bunch of awesome electrolytes. There's not a bunch of BS in it. And I'm doing exactly what you're doing. I'm taking like a big, huge mug and using like a quarter or half of a pack and having 2 or 3 hot elements in a day. And I really feel like I'm way more hydrated and overall feel better.
When I was 20, hiking in Nepal, they had this lemon tea that you'd get at the end of the day. And because you couldn't drink another chai, at like midnight. You'd have this thermos full of lemon tea. Hot lemon lime brings me right back to being a young man in the Himalaya drinking my lemon tea.
Yeah.
Literally, I love it. And it is, I started drinking salted tea in Nepal. They would have salted yak butter tea. And that salt, I'm telling you, hot salt, it's the game changer.
Yeah, and there's seasonal flavors like chocolate mint and chocolate and a bunch of other cool flavors that are really great hot in particular. So, tis the season of hot element.
Get on it. Right now, if you order through our link, you can get a free sample pack with all the LMNT flavors. If you want to party in your mouth, of course, try sparkling.
That is really good.
Go to drinkelement.com/TRS.
This episode of the Ready State podcast is brought to you by Momentous. And today we want to talk about one of the most essential supplements for older folks.
Oh, boy, you said it.
And that's collagen.
Look, I became obsessed with tissue health as I've gotten older because I've seen people who are inflamed, who aren't getting enough protein, who don't have enough micronutrients and fiber, and then they rip their Achilles.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying always that's going to be the case, but there's a reason I jump rope every day, and I really take it seriously, my soft tissue health. And one of the things I do before...
you are known for that.
I know. That's why I don't want to mess it up. One of the things I do before I train is I ingest just a serving of collagen. And one of the things I think that we know from, I think it's Keith Barr at Davis, is that you've got to call for it. Your body needs to call for these things. And so having something on board and calling for it is, for example, how you uptake calcium, right? If you want to deal with osteoporosis.
And are you saying that you call for it by taking it before you work out?
And
is
then,
that what
and
you're
then
saying?
Load, yeah. And so, what I like is that it's very simple to drop in. It also, one of the things I've found is that it asks me, the Momentous collagen has a little vitamin C in it, and it's the studied peptide. So it's not just like cow hooves, right? It's not just like, gelatin. It's the clinically studied peptide with vitamin C, so you can actually utilize it. But it also reminds me that, hey, I got to get some vitamin C in my kids first thing in the morning. So like Caroline, I make sure she has some vitamin C on board so that she's,
she can call for it, as you say.
She can call for it.
So, one of the things I want to add is that you can enjoy Momentous collagen in 2 ways. One is sort of the traditional powdered form that you can mix into stuff, and then the second way is the awesome collagen shot, which is, I know, sometimes your favorite way to get a little collagen in.
I just like, while I'm warming up, I'm like, I pound that gel shot. And it's amazing to see how many NFL teams we're working with use that, how many college teams they're buying just cases, because it's so easy for their athletes to hit that and go outside. And if we can just make sure that we're looking at soft tissue health. Look, it's not about skin for me, but gut health. Obviously, my skin is fabulous and my hair is so silky. But the idea here is what should I be taking right before? I think this is a really reasonable thing, especially as your diet may not sort of include all the protein at the right time. Even if you just looked at it as like, hey, this is the kind of pre-fuel protein that's not going to mess up your stomach and protect your soft tissues, I'm in.
Yeah, and like every other Momentous product, it is NSF certified, so you actually know that what you're taking and putting into your body is what it says it is, which is really important because supplements are definitely an investment, and if you're going to invest in taking them, and you want to make sure you're actually getting what it says it is.
Lastly, I had an athlete reach out to me this morning saying, hey, I'd love to work with Momentous because they're NSF. I know I'm not going to pop. I'm not going to take a tainted supplement that's going to ruin my career.
Exactly.
If you want to learn more, go to livemomentous.com/TRS and use code TRS for 20% off your first purchase.
So I know the PCA works with a lot of sports governing bodies, but let's just say you are a parent listening to this who knows that you might get sucked into coaching some league and or you're,
just in quotation marks.
Or you're a coach. And we do have a lot of coaches who listen to this, many of whom are professionals already. But where to begin? I mean, is it, can we just go to the PCA website? I mean, can a parent just go to the PCA website and, begin a conversation of, taking some courses and trainings? Would it be obvious to them if they're teaching, if I'm going to coach, 8-year-old volleyball and I've never coached volleyball, are there resources there?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. Thank you for bringing it up. And the short answer is yes. Like on our website, there's 2 areas where I would say people should check out. One is we have self-paced online courses for coaches. We have them for parents, and here's your role as a parent in this youth sports experience. Then we have a whole resource page on our website that's searchable. So if you need specific things that you're trying to think about, like how do I, and maybe if you're more advanced, it's like how do I incorporate mental health and well-being into my practices? Or I think where you start to your question is, as a coach, what do you want your coaching philosophy to be, right? And there's a resource on how you can start to think about, this is how I want to coach, right? These are the things. And then how do I do that? And we can equip you with the tools like, hey, you want to have fun practices? Here are some ideas of how you can have a fun practice. You want to make sure, behavior management for young kids? Here are some things that you can do to make sure to keep the kids active at the practice and not just standing around, which then is going to lead to a lot of other things as coaches we don't want to see necessarily at a young age. So I think we have those resources. One of the things that I love about PCA and the work that we do is we really try to make things bite-sized and tangible. So if somebody's listening to this podcast and they just parked their car at the soccer field and they're like, I'm going out to practice right now, they can go on our website and find something that they can immediately put into practice as part of their coaching philosophy or as part of their practice planning.
I think the coach job description is also such a great idea, and have it be sort of age specific. I mean, I've never heard that before. And I think it's a genius idea because, again, to the extent that you have parents and volunteer coaches who are maxed out and may feel like they don't have time to do training. I mean, just receiving a really clear description about what it is their goals should be for the age at which they are coaching. I mean, just that description alone, I think, would better inform a coach.
Just gives them a framework. Yeah, for sure.
I just think that's awesome. Go ahead.
I just want to, there's a word behind you on your shelf that says joy.
Yeah.
What is that about?
So I mentioned Steve Kerr before. His coaching philosophy, joy, mindfulness, compassion, and competition. And we did a little chalk talk with him, and he talked about the importance of joy. And this was probably, 6 or 7 years ago. And you'll often hear players on the Warriors, if they're in a slump or something like that, they'll say we lost our joy. We're not playing with joy, right? And when you think about sports, they're supposed to be fun. They're supposed to be joyful. And I feel like sometimes we lose that because we get caught up with everything else that's going on. We actually had that joy in the background. That was like a Christmas decoration that we had. And it was right after, we did this talk with Steve, and it was right around the holidays, and we were cleaning up, and I was like, no, this isn't just a holiday sign. This is be here 365 days a year. So for me, it's a reminder because I feel super lucky to get to do the work that we do at PCA and the conversations that I get to have every day and the work that we're doing to try to improve this youth sports culture, but also provide more access to sports for kids. Like, at the bottom line, sports is this fun, joyful moment. Now I see it with my kids, like that spark when something, when they're having fun, when they're out there, when they're with their friends, when they're learning something new, like all those things are great and we can't lose that. So the joy is just a reminder, and right below it is believe. Like, this isn't easy. We need to believe that we can do this. And so two little constant reminders of the important work we're doing, because the role that sports play in our society is so important, and it's one of the last things that can really bring people together from all different backgrounds.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
and be fun. So
Yeah, and I mean, we are of the mind that youth sports are more important than ever. To the extent that kids are really, thanks to technology and other changes in our culture, are not really getting as much free play, have more homework, are inside more, aren't going outside as much. So we sort of feel like youth sports is going to fill that gap. It can and should fill that gap, and of course, it's youth sports done right.
yeah.
I do know that the data is not good about kids staying in youth sports. And I think we talked about some of the reasons why, a bad coach or sports over specialization. I mean, there are, a number of reasons, but one of the things that I've seen in my own community, and I think this goes to sort of coach education, is this focus on the kids with early talent. And I guess what a lot of people would call favoritism, right? There's kids that show early talent
or just the size, right?
We're
comparing the physiologies of 10-year-olds.
Are a year older. Exactly. They're older.
Yeah.
They grow earlier or faster. So there's all these sort of things that actually I think aren't determinant in many cases in their long-term success in a sport. But, sometimes I wonder if some of the kids that are good because they're the best kids, or are they the kids that showed early talent and then got so much coaching focus and development above the kids who didn't show early talent? It's just always this open question for me. And I don't know if you have thoughts on it. I don't know if you guys are doing any education around this. I think it is in my community, one of the biggest reasons I've seen kids drop out of sports is they feel like the kid or the parent feels like their kid is not one of the favorites and isn't getting the kind of coaching and development that they think their kid deserves. And so they think it becomes pointless.
It's a great point. I think a couple different things that come into my mind as you were talking there is, one is, you think about this like talent trap for, Kelly, you talked about like the ones that are just bigger, faster, earlier, right? They might just be developing quicker. Relate that with, the growth and fixed mindset of how we start talking to kids, and then they're really good and like, oh, you're such a great athlete because that's who you are, versus actually they're just bigger than everybody right now. And then they're used to that, right? And then they get in this idea of like, oh, that's just who I am and that's how I'm always
right.
be.
They own that identity. Yes.
Right. And then they stop working and it's not the effort. So we talk about like the growth and fixed mindset there. I mean, I have personally coached kids. I was coaching high school basketball back in New Jersey. And so we would run summer camps. So there were kids that I coached in high school that I've known since third grade, right? Because they came up through our camps. The best kids in sixth grade struggled in high school, right? Because they might have been that bigger, faster one, but then they didn't work hard because they just thought they were always going to be the best one, right? So I think that totally is there is that type of, trap that we fall into. But I think it then comes back to the coaches of the sense of belonging. And if like somebody is on your team, and just like you all, run a business, you run a company, like you want everybody that you're working with to feel like they belong and they have a role. So what I would challenge coaches is like, yes, not everyone might be your best player or is going to play the whole game, but how are you coaching that individual for their role on this team and making sure that you have that connection? And it's very similar on like how you communicate with each player as a coach, right? Like not everyone might take to a style of coaching. So you need to make sure that you're coaching the team as a whole, but then how are you connecting with each individual player? And those ways that you connect with each individual players are great ways to talk to them about what their role is on that team. And so I think it's, going to go back to that Steve Kerr story, when you think about the makeup of the Warriors when they had, they have Steph, you have Clay, you had Draymond. Like, he was like, the way I coach Draymond is not how I coach Clay, right? Like, those are two totally different personalities. I need to make sure I know that. And not saying that all of our youth and high school sports coaches are going to be, at that level, but I think creating that connection with each individual player so they know what their role is, I think that goes a long way to them not feeling like the coach doesn't care about me and, I'm not getting anything out of this experience.
One reason I want to double click on this communication part and joy part, and we can see our junior daughter comes home and she's amped on practice. She's just talking and all the, and like, we don't even speak. We just like, she's just running her mouth. It's like, wow, I can't wait to tell you. Those moments we're cherished. We're like, oh, it's working. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
There is a book that I read last year called Belonging by Owen Eastwood.
Okay.
And it's really that, creating an opportunity in a space for connection and deep trust is actually a competitive advantage. And it's hard to do, but it's easy to wreck. And so it's a short book. Owen Eastwood, he works in the highest performance. He tells the story of where we are in our lineage, but he tells a story there that's really important where a coach snaps at him really badly and embarrasses him as a young kid in front of his team. And that trust is shattered in that moment. And the coach doesn't realize what's happened and he never gets it back, and I think that, if we're asking, the reason I mention this is that I see a lot of adults who haven't been in a coached environment for a long time. They haven't learned a new skill. They haven't been vulnerable. They haven't been embarrassed, right? There's so many dynamics going on there, this vulnerability that, if you snap at a kid, and I see it all the time, even in good coaches, snapping and being really I'm like, one of the questions I always ask is it appropriate for someone to shout at your child?
Right.
Like, would you accept that in the grocery store? You walk up and you punch that person out. Like, you know what I mean? But I guess it's okay because there's a ball involved, you know?
All rules go out the window when it comes to sports, right? Like, you can do whatever you want.
You really can. And it really does feel like, well, if I say something the way you treated my child, then, I'm going to lose my opportunity here. And I think parents just end up in this back seat.
Totally. And I think that goes back to the communication part of you as a parent. One of the resources we have is like 10 tips for a good coach-parent relationship. So if you're a parent, like, go and introduce yourself to the coach the first day. Like, try to make that connection so that there is that, they know you, like, thank them for their time. There's ways that you can build up that communication and that relationship and start to build some of those things so that if something does go wrong or there is an issue that pops up, like, you can have that, you already have something built there, right? But to your point about, that joy and like how parents can feed into that. And I think it's really important that, when we talk to parents about what their role is, it's like, we want you to be that supportive person on the sideline, not just for your child, but for their team. And guess what? Like, for the game and the sport as a whole, like, how often are you cheering for the other team when they do something really good? Like, wow, that was actually like a really nice play. Like, that's good for the sport. That's good for everybody.
I get booed. Like, all the parents around me
gets
freak
in trouble
out
with the parents when he does that.
Right. And it's just like, what are we doing? Right. It's high school. Like, let's just, so I think it's parents, the ability to check yourself a little bit on like the bigger picture of what this is, but also you as a parent making sure like you're modeling the behavior for your kids. And, you talked about, your daughter coming home and being amped, and like, if they want to talk about it, great, like, feed into that. But if they don't want to talk about it, don't talk about it. Like, one of our most, like, viral clips is a coach talking about, don't talk about the game on the car ride home with your kids, right? Like, that's the last time. You as a parent, you're sitting there, you've been sitting in the stands for an hour and a half watching the game. You have so many things that you want to tell your child that they can do better, right? And then you get in the car and you're like, you just want to pour it on. You know what? The kid doesn't want to hear about it. If they do want to hear about it, they'll tell you, and you can start having that conversation. But so many times we tell parents, like, ask permission to have a conversation with your child about it, right? Like, are you ready to talk about it? And most times they might say, I'm not ready to talk about it. But guess what? They might come back the next day and say, now I am ready. And now you've created this much better environment to have that conversation.
I know we have so much to talk about. We were never going to let you go. We went to the Olympics this year. We had a great experience. It's so
Awesome.
fun. We know so
awesome.
many world-class coaches.
I love it.
The only person I wanted to meet at the Olympics was Emma Hayes, who is the women's national soccer team coach. And at Team USA House, I had the opportunity. They had just given awards out, and Emma just docked off stage, and I was just like two other coaches, Olympians, that are head coaches, women coaches at these D1 water polo programs. We just like three of us walked, like cruise right over, like we're going to go meet this human being. But one of the reasons I mention it is that this is a phenomenon across sport where just because we think, oh, national team, they must have it sorted. And I just want to be clear that when we see the same sets of issues at colleges, we see the same sets of issues in national level, Olympic level. And when you hear the women's soccer team talk about, you know, they're there with their medals, but they talked about coach made it fun again for the first time in a long time. Yeah. She was a person. She was vulnerable. She was funny.
Yeah, I mean, that's what these women said about her after winning an Olympic gold medal.
Right.
And so it's like, it was so impactful. We're like, man, talk about a performance advantage, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, these kids obviously have the skill and the tactical ability.
But they would die for Emma Hayes.
Yeah, I mean, that was amazing to see that.
And if you're looking for, you know, would your child stand up for your coach? You know, I mean, you know, that is something we see. Yeah. I talk to kids about strength and conditioning all the time, and they're like, I hate that. They hate us. And I'm like, what do you mean your strength coach hates you? Like, how can you hate a team? Well, we were kind of rowdy as freshmen. I'm like, if you can't get 17-year-olds stoked on getting a pump at lunch or afterwards, like that's the only safe place. And we see it in the colleges all the time. Does your athlete, how do they feel about their coach? Ask them that, because it really is this barometer. And I'm talking about psycho-emotionally, right? Not like, oh, they made the right sub at the right time. I really respected that play calling, you know. And what you'll see is, man, we almost need to reorder the priorities here around, is this about communication and belonging and you know, development of humans? Because we see it when kids go to college, they're poorly prepared for those difficult conversations, which becomes more professionalized.
Yeah. I love that you brought that up, because it points to the fact that in the last couple of years, so we have this great partnership with U.S. Soccer Federation, and we've also been doing a lot of work with the NWSL, the National Women's Soccer League, and we actually we're going to do our third year of this coming up in a couple of weeks in January, but where we actually do a culture summit for their professional coaches and their GMs and assistant GMs and some front office staff, and it's a lot of the same content that we've talked about here, but it's just leveled up for that environment. But it still comes down to, like, how are you creating this culture? How are you creating this sense of belonging? And there's been, you know, we were brought in because of, you know, some of the abuses and the way that, you know, women's soccer was being run in this country. And, you know, we are on this path to improvement, and we're honored to be a part of that, both with the NWSL and with the U.S. Soccer Federation. But to your point, like, this is happening at all levels. And we actually do some of our trainings in corporate settings. Like, everywhere you go, creating a sense of belonging is going to lead to better performance. So, like, why wouldn't we do that? Right. Why would we want?
Why would we not practice that?
Right.
Just one more question on this communication piece, and I'm going to sort of appreciate that there are 1,000 different hypotheticals here, so it may be difficult to answer, but I'm wondering if you have advice, or does PCA have resources on this, I think, question that parents struggle with a lot, which is, what warrants talking to the kid's coach? Because I can say in our own, you know, we have tried, we have had times where we thought we should probably talk to the coach, but we were like, we don't want to be the crazy parents. Right. So we don't want to talk to the coach. Sometimes we have and thought, well, maybe we shouldn't have. And I imagine a lot of parents are in that same boat. Yeah. I mean, I think there's some obvious times where if there's like obvious, you know, abuse or whatever, you know, I mean, there's obviously some really flagrant situations where of course you would go and talk to your kid's coach. But I don't know how do you have advice, or does PCA have resources
Yeah.
on how do you approach that as a parent? Like, because I do think there's sometimes when parents just need to take a chill and not say anything.
But when your
And
child
sometimes
comes
they,
home crying, say,
Yeah.
"Coach hates me."
yeah, like how do parents, what's
I mean,
the
I think it's
framework here?
looking for those types of signals, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think the most common thing, which is not a reason to talk to the coach, is about playing time. Like, that's what we hear the most, right? Like, parent, my kid's not playing enough. I'm going to call the coach and be like, how come my kid's not playing enough? No, actually, you know what? That's a great opportunity for your child to go talk to the coach and say, what do I have to do at practice? What should I be doing? Because they're going to be in that situation so many times in their life. They need to get used to advocating for themselves and learning what they have to do better. You nailed it with, like, what are the signs that you're seeing from your son or daughter or child that's just off? Like, your kid so well, right? And obviously, if there's some sort of abuse, obviously you need to talk to the coach. But if there isn't something, when you think about like mental or psychological abuse that kids might be sort of holding inside, I would say, like, when kids start saying, like, I don't want to go back to practice, or they're not talking about it, or they're just not themselves. To your point, if your daughter started coming back from water polo practice and she wasn't saying, she didn't have the joy, and she was in a rut and she wasn't talking about it, then you might say, okay, this has happened now like 3 or 4 days in a row, something's going on, and you might want to try to have a conversation with your child about it. But I think if you feel like your child is in some kind of danger from a health reason, mentally, psychologically, physically, that is the time to have the conversation. But also, again, goes back to, have you set that communication up with your coach early in the season before anything happens? So then it's a lot easier for you to check in with your coach, instead of, if I haven't heard from a parent and then halfway through the season I get an incoming from a parent, I'm like, okay, like, what's going on here, right? So how do you set up those lines of communication earlier? And I think I would always say, like, trust your gut with your child, right? If this isn't them and who they are, and not the joy that they're seeing in the sport, then I think then it's a good time to at least have a conversation.
I do have one question on this playing time thing.
Mm-hmm.
And, Steve Magnus, who I follow on Instagram, I'm a big fan of, and I think we're actually going to have him on the podcast soon.
Awesome.
But he posted this thing that was like, youth coaches, no kid 12 or under should sit on the bench for an entire game.
Yeah.
And I like that. I mean,
Yeah.
I sometimes think we need a bright line for youth coaches to just say, hey, there is a point where there's a point where it's appropriate for developmentally, or from a competition standpoint, for a kid to sit on the bench for a whole game. And there's a point where it's really not. And I liked that he just delineated 12. What are your thoughts on that?
I think, great coaches get every kid into the game, right? Like, especially, and again, I'm going to go back to the expectations thing. I think it's so important for leagues and teams to set the expectation with parents and players. This is the type of team this is going to be, right? So while I don't agree with it, I don't have as much of a problem with a team saying, hey, we're doing tryouts. This is going to be competitive. There's going to be some times where your child doesn't play. And, that just might be the case. This is how things are going to happen. While, again, I don't agree with that, at least they're telling you what it is, right? And now that, hey, if we're signing up for it, we know that there might be games where we're not playing. So right or wrong, you know what you're getting into. I think, again, that's where things get broken down sometimes is, hey, I thought, how come my kid's not playing? I thought, we signed up for it. They made the team. I thought this was going to be how it was going to be. So I think the expectation setting is really key. So what type of team or organization you're getting your child involved with. But again, there are ways to get kids into a game. Like, good coaches find ways to get kids into a game regardless. So
I got one.
Oh, go ahead.
So I want to talk about the money. This is like a general subject.
Yeah.
And I think it's very complicated. The first story I'll tell you is that we have a local high school who needed a water polo coach. And so somebody sent me the job description. And I have to say that I was pretty gobsmacked to see that for an entire season of water polo, and I know what a time commitment it is, it was like $2,500.
Yeah.
So it probably reduced down to like $2 an hour or something. So I have to say that I was pretty shocked. So I think universally, especially when we're talking about youth coaches, they tend to be very underpaid. And at the same time, on the other end of the spectrum, you have parents who are paying for club programs who feel totally taxed by these, gigantic club fees and how expensive it is to keep your kid in sport. And on the one hand, I as an entrepreneur, for example, our kids are in this great club program here, club water polo program. And in many ways, I'm happy to pay them because I'm an entrepreneur and I
Right.
know what it takes to run an organization. I see how many staff coaches they have. And I still think even with the dues that I pay, which do feel expensive,
Right.
the coaches there probably still are underpaid, right?
Yeah.
And so I just think it's this money piece is very complicated because it's at every end of the spectrum, right?
Yeah. I mean,
I
I
don't know.
think
What is your take on that?
it's difficult, right? Because there's so much money being spent in youth sports now, right? It's like a $30 billion industry, right? It's bigger than the NFL, youth sports, right? Like that's how much money is involved in this, right? And I also think for a very long time, coaches have been seen as like, oh, well, like they're coaches. Like, of course they're going to do it because they love it. Like they're not there. How many coaches have said like, listen, I'm not here because I'm getting paid. Like it's because I love what I do, right? But also that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be investing in them in ways. And just like any small business or something, like you're finding ways that you need to compensate your coaches or employees in ways that might not necessarily be, with money. But I think that it's difficult, right? Because youth sports has been this platform and this infrastructure that has been built on volunteers, but then you have a lot of the platform that's now becoming more commercialized. So there's a lot more coming into it, but it's not necessarily getting to the coaches and they're not being compensated for their time. So it is I don't think I have an answer for like, how do we solve that? But I think the most important thing there is we're recognizing it. And as parents and other stakeholders within the space, like, how do we pour into coaches in ways so that they feel appreciated, right? And some of that could be with education and development, right? Those are important. Like if I'm a coach and somebody's investing in how do I get better and how they want me to come back next year, like, and again, just as we talked about, what are coaches doing for kids, giving them that sense of belonging? What are organizations doing for their coaches to feel like they belong in that organization?
Oh, so important. Last thing, obviously we can
I
just
got one more too.
We
I
can
have
just
one
drag
more
this
big
off
one.
for we're just never going to stop because I think it's so interesting, topical. I don't know if I polled a parent today, they would say they have a completely satisfactory experience with youth sports, right? Maybe the one chosen one. There's one out there because success hides a lot of dysfunction, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
How much of this responsibility is I, as a parent, I need to teach my child what it's like and what it means to be a teammate. I think we sometimes parents take that because we've talked about coaches, we've talked about parents. Obviously, this drill, the 100-pointer, I think it would be really great for kids.
Yeah.
But where and how should I think about training my child to be a good teammate, or training my child to, understand what her responsibility is to show up for the team, fed, slept, rested, ready to go. And, we see a lot of times that, this happens for elementary school teachers and all teachers. Kids show up and they haven't had breakfast, or they have had a Coke for breakfast.
Totally.
And you're right. And now I'm going to you're doing a 3-hour practice and kids haven't had anything to eat for 3 hours. And their last lunch meal was at noon. It's insane. How do we teach kids to be better competitors?
I love that. So when we work with student athletes, usually at the high school, middle school level, we have a model. We're big on like models, giving people framework. We call it the triple impact competitor. Like, how do you make yourself better? How do you make your teammates better? And how do you make the game and community better around you? Right. And so then we go into some specific details on how you can do that. We also have a workshop that we do for coaches and we do for athletes, coaching with empathy and competing with empathy. Right. So empathy is listening to understand someone's perspective without judgment. I think if everybody in this world was a little more empathetic, we'd be in a much better spot, right? So it's like, as a parent, when you're talking to your child about like what they're doing as a teammate, ask them what they've done to make those around them better and what are the things that they can do. And also, I think it's like And a lot of those things are going to be effort-based things, right? Like you don't have to be the best athlete or, the smartest person to do it. It's the effort-based things. It's the things you talked about, all the things that kids might be dealing with then they show up to practice. Like in our coach workshop, we talk to coaches about that because one of our principles is around this emotional tank, right? And kids are often showing up to practice with a drained tank. And now we're going to coach them and that's going to drain their tank again. So it's like, how do we fill them up so that they actually, have that, their tank is full so that they're staying engaged, they're staying involved, they're listening, they're competing, all those types of things. So just as the moment of connections you talked about, like when kids are showing up to practice and, coaches should be connecting with each individual player as they show up and seeing how their day was and getting a temperature check on where they are. I think teammates can do that too, because oftentimes hearing those types of things from your peers goes a lot further than hearing it from a coach or an adult.
Love it.
I love that. So this next question, which I think will probably have to be our last, I think could be an entire episode.
Yeah, there we go.
But I think up till now, we've talked primarily about, kids, parents, and coaches who are already in youth sports and have access to youth
Yes.
sports.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I am such a fan of what Positive Coaching Alliance is doing is trying to actually expand access
Yes.
to youth sports to kids who don't have access.
Yeah.
So before we let you go, I realize this is a huge part of what your mission
Yeah.
and vision is for the organization. And there's no way that you could sum it up.
Yeah.
But maybe just try to give us a little taste about what you guys are doing to increase access, which is, again, so important.
Yeah, no, thanks for the opportunity. And a lot of this work is coming out. PCA merged with another nonprofit a couple years ago, Coaching Core, which was based in Oakland, primarily focused on coaching and recruiting coaches, coaching and training, recruiting and training coaches in underserved communities. Also started working on how do you close that sports equity gap. So why is a child in Oakland, why is their youth sports experience different from their more affluent peers? And some of the work that we do is local coalition building. We work alongside partners in underserved communities. So a great example is in Oakland and our community impact team working with key stakeholders there, like the school district, the park and rec department, local companies, local youth sports organizations. What are the barriers that kids are facing in Oakland? And what they saw was there weren't really any opportunities for kids to play sports at no cost until they got to middle school and through the school. So if you think about it, like a middle school student isn't just going to then be like pick up a new sport, right? Like it's just they're at this point in their life where that's a barrier for them. So the work that we did, we brought the right people around the table. We connected some dots between the school district, the park and rec department, and last year they were able to start an elementary school league to give kids access to sports at no cost. And that created like 3,000 new youth sports opportunities. And the other thing that it created, we did some research, parents and families said that they felt more connected to their community and they felt more connected to the school. So that right there is the power of sports, right? That's where people are gathering. They're gathering at the sports fields, right? Like Saturday and Sunday morning, in the evening, you're driving by somewhere, that's where kids should be. But we need to make sure kids have that. Part of this whole professionalization and commercialization of sports is we're leaving a lot of kids behind because of the pay-to-play model. So the more that we can focus on not only getting them in sooner, because the research shows that they usually start later and drop out earlier than their more affluent peers, but also there's just not as many opportunities. So not only do we get them in, but then how do we also invest in them having the same opportunities to be able to play at that club team, even if they don't have the resources. So I think there's a lot of good opportunities, and we're doing this in Oakland. We're starting to launch it in some other cities across the country, like San Diego, San Francisco, Buffalo, a couple others. And so I think the more and more people see that, then hopefully, what we want is if you're a parent, regardless of where you are or where you live, like you should be advocating for all kids to have this opportunity.
This may be the most important podcast we've ever done with the potential to impact the greatest number of future people.
Yeah.
PCA is a for-profit business, right? This is you guys are making billions of dollars. This is like a
I
professional.
mean, we just talked about it. It's a $30 billion
right.
industry,
That's
right?
right.
Like, how can we
$30 billion
how can we make a
industry.
buck, right?
Clearly, you need support from people to change consciousness around potential of sport.
Yeah.
This is coming out at a time where people are thinking about end of year. How can we support PCA? How can parents get involved? Organizations get involved because of the work you're doing for equity, for health, for inclusion. Tell us how we get involved.
Especially to families, just to shout out to families and parents and coaches who are listening to this, who do have kids who have access to sport and are
believe in the power of sport.
Tell
us
more. How can those people
how are
help
we going to
make
support
this, make more kids have access?
I love it. Thank you. Positivecoach.org is our website. As we said, we're a couple weeks left in the year. If you're choosing where you're going to make your charitable donations, we would love for you to consider PCA. There's a lot on our website. You can also read about our impact and the impact studies that we have on, how your dollar is going to go to not only creating a better youth sports experience, but also to creating more opportunities for access for all kids. On our website, positivecoach.org, you'll also see our resource center there. If you're an organizational leader, so if you're a high school AD or you're on the board of your local Little League or you're running a team, you can contact us, via our website. Contact me directly. I'd love, as you can know, we're super passionate about this. I think the power of Positive Coaching Alliance, we always say the most important word is that alliance. Like, we can't do this without other people. We have a great network of people, but we always want to bring more people in. So I really appreciate the opportunity. I know what a great following you all have. And this is obviously an awesome conversation, and excited to have you all more involved because we need more people like you that are banging the drum for a positive youth sports experience for all kids. And
coaches who are engaged and meaningfully pushing this, this opportunity. Shout out Coach Taylor at IU, being a head coach at a D1 school who has these principles driving her program.
Yeah. It can be done. It can be done. So,
and I mean, I would also just like to shout out all coaches. I mean, it is really, I think, one of the most important jobs and really difficult. And I am such a fan of the work you're doing to support coaches in particular.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
I think coaches need more support and more education, and they need more high fives and positive regard in this crazy system that is the youth sports. So thank you so much for the work you're doing. We can
positivecoach.org.
Positivecoach.org. Yes.
Check it out, everybody. Please consider supporting them. And thank you, Jason, so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Ready State Podcast. If you like what you're hearing, check out all our episodes here or at thereadystate.com. And be sure to subscribe and leave a review on iTunes to help others find our show.
Check us out and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at The Ready State.
Until next time, cheers, everyone.
You got it. You better stop it.